Kitco Mining's special coverage of the Precious Metals Summit is brought to you by Nucor Gold.
Hello, and now for something completely different, copper in Kazakhstan. I'm Paul Harris for Kitco Mining at the 2024 Precious Metals Summit in Beaver Creek, Colorado. And joining me today to discuss this is Darren Klinck, President of Arras Minerals. Darren, welcome to Kitco.
Great to be here.
Now, Darren, Kitco said to me, do something different. Well, copper in Kazakhstan certainly ticks that box. It's perhaps as different can be from what we usually do at an event like this. I've known you for many years, but it's always been in the context of gold exploration and development. First Oceana Gold, more recently Bluestone Resources, but you've since switched gold for copper to lead Arras Minerals. I understand copper, but why Kazakhstan?
You know, I have to be very honest, I didn't know much about Kazakhstan 3 years ago. Spent a lot of time around the world, as you mentioned, throughout Australasia, Latin America, and I think like many in North America in particular, it's not something that's right at the top of the radar screen. But as I was introduced to the opportunity and met my business partner, Tim Barry, who moved his whole family over to Kazakhstan here a couple of years ago, I started to realize that it was a part of the world that I didn't know much about, but that my perception was very different than what's actually going on there. Kazakhstan, when you look at mining, just as an example, top 10 in the world in terms of most of the things that we use today: titanium, iron ore, copper. Uranium, of course, number one, top of the list. And then when you look more broadly, the oil and gas industry, agriculture, it's truly a nation that even in the last 5 or 6 years has gone through immense change. They've done things in terms of reforms across all aspects of business, but when it comes to mining, they effectively copied Western Australian mining code, threw in a few of the good things out of Ontario and Quebec, and now you've got the major mining companies starting to arrive. So it's been nothing but I think positive surprises all the way along the way, and from a jurisdiction perspective, probably one of the easier places to operate that I've worked in over the last 20 years.
Now, I was going to ask you about that. You talked about the rule of law and the fact they've sort of copied good mining codes from elsewhere around the world. What about sort of political risk factors?
Yeah, I mean, President Tokayev took over in 2018, and really his mandate and what he's brought forth is to bring a lot of change and bring a lot of reforms, not only from a as I said, fiscal or economic perspective, but also from a governance perspective. It's never really been seen before, I think, in that part of the world. Last year, one of the mandates that came out was that the president can be elected for one 7-year term. Previous president, took over when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1990 and was there for 28 years. And so effectively what he's been doing is taking power away from the government institutions, encouraging foreign investment. You have, very large multinational companies, groups like Chevron, for example, that have been there for well over 2 decades. 3 years ago, they expanded their operations and invested $46 billion. You don't invest that sort of capital if you're concerned about the government and the support from your investment for your investment. And so, we're obviously a small company. You've got the majors like Rio Tinto and Glencore. Tech's an investor in us as well, and these companies all, of course, do their homework around safe and security of their investments, and it's going from really strength to strength.
Now, Kitco Mining recently did a deep dive into the copper space with the Kitco Copper Masters panel that I hosted. During that panel, Robert Friedland, executive chair of Ivanhoe Mines, he said, people don't understand how difficult it is to find and develop and build a mine. Obviously, he's had great success. He brought the world Oyu Tolgoi in Mongolia, more recently Kakula in Democratic Republic of Congo. His point there is you've got to go to the places where the good deposits are. That's just the nature of the beast. Is Kazakhstan set to be the next Mongolia, the next DRC?
Well, interestingly enough, the belt that we're working on in the northeastern part of Kazakhstan continues out into Mongolia, the Boshego-Chingiz belt. I think without a doubt, most probably wouldn't recognize or be aware that Kazakhstan, I think, is 5th in the world in terms of exports for refined copper. So not only are they finding it as it being mined, but it's also being refined. And in fact, there's more smelter capacity that's coming on there as well. But no, I would agree. I think, when you talk about, geopolitical risk, you talk about, where do we find deposits? There's an interesting article, I think it was Mike Christie from First Quantum had posted this a couple of weeks ago and talking about the fact that there's lots of copper around. There's lots of copper at 0.1 or 0.2% copper, for example, but there really hasn't been the investment in exploration to find the new DRCs, the new Oyu-Tolgois. I think in Kazakhstan they've got a setup there where it already is a top 10 producer of copper in the world. Most people don't know that. But it's had a 30-year sort of pause in terms of modern exploration, largely because when Kazakhstan became a country at the fall of the Soviet Union, really the focus of a small group of companies and influential people was really about producing cash flow. And so, as we know, exploration is a cost center. And so here we are now, arriving into Kazakhstan with a new mining act post-COVID. And there's enormous opportunities. You can pick up your permits in 30 days. You can get your licenses in 30 days. Where in the world can you do that, right? And this is really, I think, what probably Robert's saying is that you have to go where the minerals are, but you also have to go where you can actually do the work, where you can advance them, where you can get permits, where the communities and the government want you to be there. And that is absolutely Kazakhstan.
Now, when you look at a map, Kazakhstan is neighbours with China and Russia, and as you mentioned, its previous history was as part of the Soviet Union. Does it have an affinity for China, for Russia, more the Western world? Is it trying to be independent?
It's very firmly independent. And in fact, I think, when you go back to 1990 and the 34 years, I guess, onwards since then, they've done an admirable job to maintain and really enhance that independence. Yes, I mean, most probably wouldn't appreciate it's the second longest border in the world. Second only to the one between Canada and the United States is the border between Russia and Kazakhstan. China is to the southeast as well. But where you sit today, 60% of the foreign direct investment that comes into Kazakhstan every year comes from either North America or Europe. And so, the Kazakh government, I think the Kazakh economy is very much dependent on those sort of broader international investors. Turkey's a big investor there as well. Kazakhstan is effectively one of the Turkic nations. You've had huge investment coming out of the Middle East. The tallest tower in all of Central Asia was funded by Middle Eastern investment. The bottom of it is the Sheraton Hotel that we often will stay in the middle of Astana. And so when you cross-reference, yes, there's Chinese investment. Yes, there's been obviously Russian investment, which has been curtailed on the back of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. But Chevron has invested $46 billion to expand their operations there 3 years ago. Those are real dollars, right? And these are coming from North American companies, they're coming from European companies, and even on the back of the conflict that broke out, you've seen a lot of North American and European companies that had operations, offices, distribution, manufacturing in Russia. They've picked up and moved to Kazakhstan. So Kazakhstan's one out of the whole thing, and they've been very careful, I think, to make sure they're on the right side of the sanctions.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about Arras specifically. What really gets people's attention, of course, is the drill bit. What work have you been doing and what are some of the results been?
So our strategy as we got into the country just over 3 years ago, we entered into the northeastern part in Pavlodar into a belt that was underexplored. And largely on the basis of the fact that, for the most part, you've got between 10 and 40 meters of unconsolidated cover. And this is where the majors are looking today. For the most part, if it sticks out of the ground and looks like the mountain behind us here in Beaver Creek, someone in the last 150 years has gone up, banged a rock, taken a sample, they know what's there. But we've got cover, and that's really kind of masking the geology. And so our strategy as we got in and did an initial an option deal on the Muskoga copper gold porphyry, one of the 3 porphyries that's known in this belt, was then to set aside and really evaluate a lot of the Soviet work that was done in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and build out a land package in this very prospective belt. And we're now sitting as the 3rd largest land package holder in the country focused on copper behind Rio Tinto and Fortescue. And over the last 2.5 years, we've been able to move forward, not only on the regional licenses, but also at Muskoga. We attracted the investment from Teck Resources 2 years ago. They're just under a 10% holder. And then negotiated a strategic alliance with them in December as well. So this year, this summer program, we've got programs across all the licenses, both on the ground that is between Teck and Arras and that strategic alliance, as well as our 100% owned. And the drill is turning now at the Elemis project, which is very exciting. And I think over the next 2 to 3 months, we'll start to see assays coming out of there.
Okay, what's your plan for the company over the next 18 months to 3 years? Where do you want to take Arras to?
Yeah, well, as an early mover in the country and really putting our foot on a big land package, we're definitely focused on gold, on copper and copper gold. In fact, I mean, in many cases, as you know from dealing with porphyries, you've got gold and copper that come together. For us, it's really about advancing the projects that we've got. We've got drilling that's going on in Elemis. We think we have a very good chance of making a new Tier 1 discovery. We have confidentiality agreements with roughly about 80% of the world's largest copper miners and some of the biggest gold miners as well. And so you're seeing these companies that are now over the last 6 to 12 months are starting to get set up. And so for us, it's really about being able to finance and try to do so in a manner where we keep our share structure as tight as possible. And move those projects forward, but then bringing in partners like Teck, and Teck obviously focused on critical minerals, great partner to have, and they're helping us with some of the heavy lifting on about 2/3 of our land package this year and next year, where they're funding the exploration work through to the end of next year, and then at that point, they have the opportunity to select up to 4 projects where they will then start to earn equity. The end of next year, we'll still have 100% equity in everything, and we can't think of too many other places we'd rather be exploring for copper and critical minerals than in Kazakhstan at the moment.
A lot of CEOs in your position, in copper exploration and development companies, the end goal is to sell to a bigger company. You mentioned you've got a strategic investment in Teck, you've got CAs with a number of other companies, but there's been relatively little M&A activity of big companies buying small companies. The transaction earlier this summer of BHP buying Filo, that's perhaps an exception. What's your feel for what the big copper companies are looking for, what they're trying to do, and the timelines they're looking to do that on?
Sure. I think one of the big challenges we have right now is cost structure, right? And in fact, a recent example of that was earlier this year when Freeport announced that they had completed their study on the expansion at Baghdad to expand the concentrator. And if there's ever a place that you would think you would be expanding your brownfields operations, it would be, in a place like Arizona where you've been mining for decades. But it was going to cost 3 times as much as it historically would cost for a brownfields expansion, and we're not doing it. And I think, from a perspective where we are in Kazakhstan, this is one of the reasons we really like it. It's a low-cost jurisdiction. It's not only is it cheap to drill compared to many other parts of the world. You're at 200 meters above sea level. But your cost to mine, I think, is some of the lowest in the world. Your cost to build is some of the lowest in the world. And so now you're seeing these larger companies that are struggling to build mines at the top of the Andes, where you have to bring power and infrastructure and everything in, or even in brownfield sites in Western countries, whether it be Canada, the US, Australia, or even places like Chile that are very well developed. Enter Kazakhstan, where the cost of diesel at the pumps is 48 cents a liter. Your power cost to run your mill is 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. You've got a highly skilled workforce, 99% literacy, but your labor rates are substantially lower than what you would find in places like Chile or Arizona or Australia. So I think this is one of the reasons we've really seen an influx to interest from the majors into Kazakhstan. Not only is it well endowed, not only has it been maybe forgotten about for 30 years in that period of 1990 through to 2018 from an exploration perspective, but your cost structure allows you to find a deposit that's 0.3, 0.35, 0.4% copper, where in many jurisdictions, including Canada and the US, you probably can't capitalize to build a mine. In Kazakhstan, you can print cash with that.
I think it's an interesting point you touched on there, the cost of some of the brownfield expansions that the copper miners are looking at. The part of the answer, near term at least, it seems to be, in terms of supply, adding new supply, is brownfield expansion. That a lot of companies have taken the option of, or looking at the option of supersizing their concentrators. And that obviously comes with a high capital cost. I think 3.5 billion, you said, at Baghdad in Arizona. Investors are sort of still pushing back on that in terms of the capital discipline. And presumably there's only so much brownfield expansion you can do before that option is exhausted. How do you see the expansion of copper production sort of playing out over the coming years?
Well, again, obviously it's an economics thing, right? And I mean, the largest copper miner in the world, if they're not prepared to expand their copper concentrator in the middle of the copper belt in Arizona, it tells us something about it, right? I mean, they are focused on the numbers and on what makes sense fiscally. And if the board's not going to approve that there, then you kind of wonder, where are those expansions going to come from, right? And Arizona is not nearly as challenged from an infrastructure perspective as if you're in the top of the Andes in Chile or Peru, right? So I really Argentina, absolutely. And so you've got challenges everywhere. There's no doubt. As has been pointed out in the industry, there's lots of copper around that's 0.1 or 0.2%. That's not going to make the day at a $4 copper price. And so I guess one option is we can all sit on our hands and wait for the copper price to go up, right? I mean, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't, right? But when you look at a jurisdiction like Kazakhstan, and this is why we're explorers, so we're not in the middle of trying to build a mine, but we're explorers trying to find something that we think can be a mine and can be a mine quickly. Our experience with regards to getting our permits, getting the support from the government, even getting finance with support from the Kazakhstan government. We've seen that with some recent developments as well. Why not go somewhere where there's a cost advantage, and so your threshold to find something that's actually economic is much lower. This is the Kazakhstan cost advantage. So I think at the end of the day there has to be more copper. I mean, even the big gold companies CEOs are talking about the fact it's like, I don't know where the copper is going to come from, but they'll come from porphyries, and they'll come from jurisdictions that are supportive of investment, and where there's cost structures that allow you to make money.
Okay, Darren, how do you think the rest of the year will play out in the copper space?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's always lots of pundits, and we've obviously seen the copper price go up and seen it come back down. I know there's always a lot of focus as well on whether it be the Chinese economy, the North American and European economy as well. It seems to be pretty comfortable on where it's at right now. I mean, companies are making money. But I think for not only this year, but for many years ahead of us, we still have a big challenge as to where copper is going to come from, and where at the end of the day, it's only going to come out of the ground if it's economic. I think we're well positioned in Kazakhstan over the next 5 to 10 years. I think it's going to be one of the busier places in the world for exploration on critical minerals. It's already proving to be a big producer of many of the things that we use today, and we're really happy to be there.
Excellent. Well, Darren Klinck, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks again, Paul.
I'm Paul Harris, and this is Kitco Mining.
Kitco Mining's special coverage of the Precious Metals Summit is brought to you by Nucor Gold.